Welcome to the ADOS Empowered Podcast. This is the show where collision repair professionals, calibration techs, insurers, and OEMs come together to stay ahead of the curve. Each episode, we're going to dive into the latest and advanced driver assistance systems, exploring emerging technologies, calibration best practices, and evolving industry standards. Whether you're in the shop, in the field, or in the boardroom, we're your go-to source for thought leadership, collaboration, and real-world insights to drive safer and more efficient repairs. Let's get empowered together. Welcome back to another episode of the ADOS Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Adcock. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships with Revv. Joined by a very special guest today, Vice President of Quality Repair and Market Development at CCC, Mr. Dan Risley. Dan, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to join us here today. Really looking forward to our conversation and uncovering a lot of different topics and information. So um, again, appreciate you spending some time with us. Got CIC coming up. We've got SEMA coming up. Before we kind of dive into our topics, what are you looking forward to most and interested in seeing as we head into Vegas here relatively
Man,
soon?
well, you mentioned some things, but certainly not all, Joel. So, uh, for me, the MSO Symposium really kicks everything off for me. So I help manage and produce the MSO Symposium, and that's a really well attended event. It's all day on Monday, and I think they're expecting record attendance this year. In fact, I think about 450 attendees for the MSO Symposium, and then of course Tuesday rolls right into the Collision Industry Conference, and that's typically the largest event of the year for CIC as well. So Monday and Tuesday will be extremely busy for me on the personal side, and then of course Wednesday, Thursday chock full of meetings with industry folks.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm actually attending. Oh, so the MSO Symposium, my first time with that, and then my first CIC as well will be Tuesday morning. So I'm looking forward to being part of that as well. You spend time obviously as the chairman of CIC. What does that look like? How many? I mean, you're busy as it is with your role at CCC. What does that entail as far as being part of CIC? What does that mean to you?
Well, first, I'm very grateful that CCC allows me to volunteer time to do these things. As long as it doesn't impede upon my daytime duties, they're good with it. It's typically a 2-year commitment, and CIC meets 4 times a year. And there's just, I would say, a lot of prep in between the meetings. So I'm working with the committees continuously in between meetings, developing the content and the program for the next meeting.
Love it. Yeah, like I said, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be out there all week as well, and it's always kid. It's my favorite week of the year. I know some folks are not big fans of it, but I've gone for many years now myself, and I'm just as far as SEMA goes, and really looking forward. I think it's a great opportunity to reconnect with folks and sort of press the flesh and shake hands and see folks that you haven't seen in a while. So
I absolutely love SEMA week. At the end of the week, I won't be saying that, but I absolutely
yeah, yeah,
love SEMA week. And especially for CCC and Revv, we just had a big announcement that came out earlier in the week regarding our relationship. So really excited to talk to the industry and address questions about what that integration looks like and the value to our mutual customers.
yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that. Big announcement was released on Wednesday this week. Um, I can speak from Rev itself. We're grateful for the opportunity, obviously, to partner with CCC on this, and really, I think it in a lot of ways it helps move the industry forward with a lot of the things that we see in terms of bottlenecks and concerns around proper execution of a lot of the administration operational sides of the ADOS world, right? So, um, yeah, again, I think it's really exciting. It's a big announcement. It's been a lot of work, certainly.
Hmm.
I guess I'm curious from CCC side. I mean, I think you guys see a lot of benefit from this as well, but like what's sort of the overarching premise here as far as partnering with a group like Rev, or I know there's other companies that you work with too on this as well. Like what
Hmm.
does that look like? I mean, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, there's a lot of folks that are involved, but what's sort of the sentiment from CCC side on this?
At the end of the day, Joel, we wanted to make it easier for shops to identify what calibrations are needed on a vehicle, document that accurately and consistently on an estimate, providing visibility and transparency, and then ultimately having supporting documentation to show why you did what you did, why it was added to the estimate, and why the work was performed. So to me, it's all about making that a little bit easier for the collision repair to do business, eliminating friction points, and just making sure that they have a safe and proper repair when that vehicle leaves the shop.
Yeah, it's that's exactly it, right? It's create those efficiencies, it's document procedures, it's the right information, it's eliminating that a lot of that friction points and everything else, which I'm really hopeful that a lot of shops will gravitate to something like this because of the fact that it creates so many efficiencies for them. And you know, look, there's anywhere you talk to, even you talk to probably a lot of the same people I talk to, and a lot of different resources. Shops are looking for ways to overcome some of the challenges that they've seen in the volume side. We hear it really everywhere. Maybe next year some of that volume concern will level off a little bit, but um, this is a really good opportunity to really sort of channel that time and energy into uh, really which shouldn't be a cost center in a shop. I mean, it should be a revenue opportunity in terms of doing ADOS, whether you're subletting or doing some of those calibrations in house. So again, big announcement. It was really exciting. I talked to a lot of people on my end that um, were really excited to hear about this. I think it bodes really really well for the industry as a whole, and I know we're really excited on the rep side. So
Yeah, I'll add to
yeah.
that, Joel. So, one of the things that I think that comes out of all this is we publish a lot of data, industry trends, and one of the areas that I know the industry is honing in on, and this integration certainly is going to help, and that is when are calibrations being identified in the repair process or during the estimating process. So if you look at some of the data we published recently in Crash Course, 60% of calibrations are being identified on supplement one or later.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not catching them on the front end. They're catching them a little bit later in the process. Now, I've had people say, hey, then that's okay if a calibration shows up on supplement one, because that's part of our process, right? We're going to write an estimate up front. We'll do a thorough teardown, and then we'll add those calibrations on supplement one. I'm okay with that. I think the challenge becomes when you dig a little bit deeper, peel back that onion. Of that 60% that shows up on supplement one or later, almost half of those are showing up on supplement two or later. So
Mm-hmm.
they're not identifying it on the original estimate. They're not doing it during the initial disassembly of the vehicle. They're catching it later in the process. And there's a lot of negative downstream impact, not only to the shop cycle time, but also to the consumer, to the
Yeah,
carrier when it comes to length and rental. You're adding costs into the claims handling process that we think can be mitigated by working with a company like Rev, where if I'm that shop estimator now, during the estimating process, I can identify what might need to be done on that car. And if I don't capture it on estimate one, I certainly could capture it on supplement number one.
certainly helps out. I mean, you get out in front of it, as I like to say, early and often, right? And you should be thinking about it on just about every vehicle at this particular point. So yeah, it's interesting when you dive into the data too, and you start thinking about sort of that downward stream of like what's the cause and effect of identifying ADOS later in the
Hmm.
process. Or if you run your post scan and all of a sudden now something's being flagged as you missed it. Now you've got to sort of peel back that onion, like you say, and figure out, where do we solve this problem? Is it going to cause any additional delays? Is it going to affect length of rental, cycle time, customer experience, all that stuff? So, as I always like to educate whoever I talk to, if they're talking about ADOS, get out in front of it. E1 supplement before you lock it up.
Yeah.
Get way out in front of it to get all of your ducks in a row. Get all your pre-approvals. Get whatever information you need in front of the people that are going to be ultimately paying the bill on these, and you're going to serve yourself a lot better. And I think this particular integration certainly helps with that in a lot of different ways. Looking back at your career, you've been in the industry roughly 30 years now.
Hmm.
Did you ever envision like where we're at this particular point? I mean, what was that like when you started out? Like, what was your first job in the industry, Dan?
Well, my first job in the industry was working for my father in a family owned collision repair facility on the south side of Chicago. So I know there's probably a lot of listeners here that are in the industry that have worked for family before.
Yep.
I could say my greatest sympathies to you.
You
Working
feel
for
your pain.
family is not easy. I can assure you that. And after my dad fired me for the 10th time, I decided to go out on my own and wanted to stay within the industry and do some other things. But the industry has been great to our family. And the early days, I started out in a family-owned shop and learned just to do just about everything from painting to body work to running the shop. It was a family-owned shop, so you did whatever needed to be done.
Right. What were some of your first, like, early lessons in leadership? Like, where did that start to branch into some of the things that have developed into your career at this particular point?
Well, one of the first lessons was listen to what your dad has to say. Otherwise, you may not be employed. No, all joking aside, I think some of the early lessons I learned, from my dad too, was if you don't have the answer, don't get. If you don't have the answer to a question, don't give one for the sake of giving one. So that's really been a lesson that's really played well throughout my career. I do a fair amount of public speaking, and I get asked a lot of questions, and I certainly don't have all the answers. And I think people have a propensity to want to give an answer, and it's okay sometimes to say that I don't know or let me get back to you, and circle back with that individual. I think people appreciate that more so than giving them some word salad answer and then finding out that what you said may not necessarily have any teeth.
Wasn't true or factual on any level. You were just blowing hot air, as my dad used to like to say. It's like
Yeah, no
you
hot
get a
air.
bit.
Hot air is not good.
The hot air is not good. No, it's certainly not. Funny story is I think the first time I met you was actually in Chicago. You may not remember this or not, but it was about 15 years ago when I started. I was actually working for Troy Gates at Gates Collision Centers and things, and Stephen Regan was also part of this conversation. So I remember that conversation. We were in downtown Chicago, and I think you were the president of ASA, and we were having some conversations around like scorecards and KPIs and all this stuff. And
Hmm.
I can tell you that I was relatively new to the industry, and a lot of what you guys were talking about just washed right over my head. Not to say I'm by any stretch, better today than I was that at that time, but I just remember like the level of professionalism you had, your leadership, being able to communicate in terms of sort of your position at that particular point. Again, this is going back about 15 years ago.
Hmm.
When we start looking at the future of the industry, and it's right on us right now, right? I mean, 10, 15 years is a long, long time in this
Yeah,
industry. I
it
mean,
is.
we start talking, regulation coming down in a couple of years with automatic emergency braking, and you start talking about, is there a technician shortage or qualified technician shortage and things like that. I mean, where do you see it in a couple of years? Like, what does that lens look like for you, Dan?
I think the next big jump for us, so some of the things you've mentioned, they've just been ongoing problems, right? Oh, technician shortage, we've heard about that. I don't think we'll ever stop hearing about that. I think that's, in perpetuity, we're going to hear things like that. I think the next big jump for us is going to be all around ADAS. You might be saying, well, we're already here. We're already doing all kinds of stuff around ADAS. I think that next jump, though, is going to be in the form of maybe perhaps regulation as it relates to ADAS systems. It could be both national and at a state level. And what I mean by that is this: I can envision a day where if the vehicle you're driving, you get a discount if the ADAS system has been certified as operating properly,
Mm,
as an example, right?
right.
Um, State of Illinois, I'm from Chicago. We have state emissions programs where you've got to get your emissions tested on an annual basis. Well, I don't think it's a stretch to think that someday we might see inspections for safety systems. I
Yeah.
could see a day where if you get a Carfax report, checking out what happened on that vehicle if it's been in an accident, maybe there's something that tells you also that the safety systems have been checked out and are working properly. I think that's another big jump for us, and I don't see that as too far behind. And you know, you think about dealers too from a dealership perspective, all the vehicles, the used vehicles they have on their lots, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that at some point they'll probably start certifying that this all the safety systems are working properly when you buy that vehicle.
Yeah. Consumer demand is, when they go out and buy a new car, they don't know what ADAS is, obviously. Or, most are just unfamiliar with the term and the acronym. There's tons of
Mhm.
acronyms.
Way too many acronyms.
Way too many acronyms. That's my wife is like, what do all these mean? I'm like,
There's an acronym right here.
right, exactly. Yeah. Um, but you talk about um, the the sheer amount of just differences in terms of technology and the growth of, I lived in California for a while, same thing as Illinois, being an emission
Mhm.
state where you've got to go do a smog check, right?
Yeah.
There's been white papers done by different groups on, is routine maintenance going to be part of every vehicle potentially? But my point was that, consumers are looking for parking sensors. They're looking for a backup camera. They want that functionality on their car when they buy it now when it's brand new. And blind spots and adaptive cruise controls, they have no idea how it works. Um, I'm interested in like how do we reach consumers from really like a grassroots level? And I think of like the back in the 80s and 90s, you had the seatbelt guys,
Yeah.
the crash test dummies, and you had different things out there that were consumer oriented about safety, whether that was for the health of them or for safety. I'll be interested to see if more of something like that comes out because I've heard from different groups that that maybe is a direction we go. And the reason I bring this up is that you've got, as you know, a certain group of shops that follow OEM procedures by the book. They do things
Mhm.
really, really well. They're your platinum certified shops. And then you've got your consumers who are limited in terms of their knowledge. And then there's this group in between that I think about a lot of like how do we connect with them, whether they're in a rural market, nobody's really reaching out to them. They're just getting kind of day by day, like getting through the motions of fixing cars and doing the best they can. How do we connect with those shops? Like, what do you see as an opportunity there, Dan?
With connected with the shops, I don't I'm gonna back up a little bit, like, connecting with the consumer, because my mind was kinda going with the consumer
Oh, I
piece. You're
love
kinda
it. Yeah.
leading me down that path, so I'm gonna go back to the consumer, and, in addition to what I already shared with, maybe there's something that shows up on a Carfax report, maybe the dealership as part of the purchase of the used car, maybe when you purchase a new car from the dealer, maybe there's a maintenance and service package that comes along with that, that validates and updates and checks your safety systems on an ongoing basis, right? You're gonna have probably shops at some point using it as an opportunity for even upsell opportunities and or to identify pre-existing damage. So imagine coming into the shop, you write the estimate for the vehicle, you do a scan on the vehicle, you check some of the calibrations on that vehicle, and telling the consumer, hey, by the way, this is what's going to cost to repair your car. But did you also know that your blind spot needs to be calibrated, right? Marking that on the estimate, maybe perhaps using that as an upsell opportunity. And of course, regulation if something should ever come to pass. I
Right.
think those are ways that we're going to get more of that consumer engagement and more of the consumer awareness, not just maybe those public service awareness announcements. I think we're going to get there faster with those sorts of initiatives. And then as far as reaching out to the shops, I think reaching some of the more remote shops is always going to be a challenge. It doesn't really make a difference what the issue is. It's just how connected the shops are.
Yeah.
But I think as big as this industry is, it's also very small. So I think from a trade press perspective, from an association perspective, whether it be state or national, I think there's enough information that's being shared now where that is being pushed down to all levels of repairs in the industry, as evidenced by the fact that when you look at some of our recent data around scanning, showing at least 90% of all vehicles now are getting a scan. So obviously, information has made its way out to everybody in the industry that the need to scan a car either pre or post or both. And
Yeah.
now I think that next big leap for us is really on the calibrations because we have not seen that sort of penetration yet on calibrations. I think our recent numbers would show a little over 30% of all claims have at least one calibration. 50% of all newer model vehicles have at least one calibration. And I would say that those numbers, Joel, are low. I think they
Yeah.
should be significantly higher. And I don't think there would be anybody in the industry that would challenge me on that fact. I talk a lot to the car manufacturers, and when we share that information, they're like, whoa, this is really grossly low. So I think that over time, we're going to see a greater penetration on the calibrations. And that is going to be the awareness that we just talked about. It's getting that information out to everybody. And I think that's why if you look at a graph of how calibrations have kind of made their way into the industry, it looks like a hockey stick right now, where
It
it's
does.
low penetration and now it's going up. Well, guess what? Rev is going to help that continue to go up. You're going to continue to bring that awareness because as you're writing an estimate in CCC One and you click on the button and you get all these Rev recommendations, now and there's really no excuse, right? It's right in front of my face. There's no guesswork, and now I'm identifying what things might need to be calibrated as part of that particular repair.
Yeah. I'm curious, the conversations with the OEMs, if you can share a little bit, there's, you know, conversation that I hear, our community and phone calls I get or emails. It's like, how do we connect with the OEMs better? Like, how do we get them to standardize what they're talking about? There's a lot of gray areas. It's one position statement to the next isn't necessarily the same. Have you had any conversations or is there any opportunity, do you think, to connect with the OEMs to create some sort of standardized terminology that fits the ADAS community?
Well, I'm going to take a step back from a CCC perspective. Of course, we're always talking to the OEs, but talking to them about, hey, coming up with standardized nomenclature isn't necessarily our swim lane. I think that's more of an industry question, right? People, collision repairers from the industry asking OEs, can you simplify the process? And here are the challenges. That's not typically an area that we would go down, but I think that that message has been communicated to the OEs. I think that's out there. Now, I think the challenge is always going to be all of them have their own nomenclature they would like to use.
Right.
Sometimes it's used as a differentiation in the marketing of their product. So I'm not sure if you're ever going to get harmonization across the board with everybody saying the same thing. But I think where we probably can land, where there's probably a safe landing, is if we start to do it by sensor or by component. So instead of talking about a feature, is it a radar? Is it a front radar that we're talking
Right.
about? I think everybody could rally around a sensor because a sensor is a sensor. What you might want to call that, I mean, that could be up to the individual OEM, but certainly from a component level, we could probably start to standardize around that.
That makes sense. Yeah, look, they've got their own reasons of why they do certain things, and
Yeah.
there's marketing, there's brand, there's certainly they want that differentiation piece, and I think when you start looking at it intuitively, you can understand exactly what they're talking about, but it seems as though it's an easy target for certain folks within the industry to talk about the fact that they just don't feel like the OEMs are advocating for the shops as they potentially should, which again, depending on which side of the fence you land on with that, could be one way or the other. And like you say, maybe that doesn't happen and maybe it does. But I
Yeah,
want to talk a
I'd
little
say
but
just to add to that, Joe, just like the conversations that I've been a party to, I would say that that would be not be the case. I think I've spent a lot of time with the car manufacturers at CCC, and they're definitely on the ground. They're definitely listening. They get the feedback, and they do care. So, maybe there's a disconnect in terms of maybe what's shared,
right.
externally to the greater industry. But I would say from my engagement with them, they're pretty heavily engaged. And at the end of the day, they want their cars repaired, fixed correctly, right? They want consumers to stay in their car. And if a car's not fixed properly, maybe somebody decides to switch brands because they don't like the way the car's performing. So they have a vested interest to make sure that the information is shared with the community that's repairing the cars, so it's
Yeah.
repaired properly and put back on the road.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. I agree. I mean, they care, right? They've built the technology. They've gotten ahead of the game as far as the safety goes. They know that people are, I think one of the data points in the referencing back to the SECA conferences around distracted driving. It's amazing how many people are still, and it's actually increasing, right? Distracted driving. I mean,
Yeah.
it falls right into the need to have ADAS technology helping keep people safe. Otherwise, because who knows what happens. But talking about a little bit of data here, I wanted to kind of get into you guys had published at CCC your crash report from Q3 here, the crash
Mhm.
course. Um, is there any particular data in there that strikes you as interesting or anything you wanna talk about within that particular,
Yeah,
most
so
current
there's
report?
actually 2 pieces, Joel, and we touched on one of them already, but I'll double back on it, and that is when calibrations are being identified in the
Yeah.
process, right? So that's gonna be thing 1 because there's a lot of downstream negative impact to that. Now, what I wanna call out on that is the fact that we have tools in the marketplace today, such as Rev, and there's others out there, that are gonna make that easier. So, the reason why I wanna call that out is I think that's a number that we need to track for the foreseeable future because we should see a downturn in that number. We should see estimators identifying calibrations earlier in the process. We
Right.
shouldn't see 60 we shouldn't see the number getting worse, right? We've seen that number getting either worse or staying where it's at around that 60% for a while now. I think with Rev being part of that mix and other integration partners being part of that mix, we should start to see that eat away at that number a little bit where we're seeing more identified either EO1 or certainly no later than SO1. And I think so that would be thing number one. That is, I wouldn't say it's surprising yet. If we don't see that number drop in the foreseeable future, that will be surprising because that means people aren't looking at the recommendations that are being served up to them, right?
Right.
You could use the excuse before, I don't know what I don't know. Well, if you have tools out there to use, you should know and you should be able to capture it. So that would be thing one. The other one that is interesting to me is, and it's newer data for us, is identifying the impact to cycle time when there's a calibration on a claim.
Mm,
Now, it may not come as a surprise to you or anybody that's listening. Okay, if there's a calibration, it probably means there might be a little bit longer cycle time. What we're seeing is when there's one calibration and then you jump it to two or three or more, every time you take that leap, it adds almost another day and a half or 2 days to the cycle time. That should be concerning to everybody in the industry for a couple of reasons. First off, we don't want to add any additional days to cycle time, right? But I think the reason why it's more concerning for me today is we just talked about the fact that we haven't even seen the full penetration of calibrations on claims yet.
Right.
That number is going to grow. If we're feeling the pain now on cycle time, I can assure you the pain we're feeling now is
Yep.
only going to get worse. So that's something that we need to keep a keen eye on. Now, how is that going to get better over time? Well, I think a couple things. First off, we've already talked about tools such as what Rev has, right? But there's other things that are happening in the marketplace too. Although calibrations aren't new to the marketplace, I don't think the industry is adopted as fast as we should to the technology. Whereas they're not doing a lot of things in-house. They may be sending a vehicle off property to have the
Mhm.
calibrations done. Maybe they send it to a dealer. Maybe they send it to a third-party sublet that's brick and mortar. Maybe they call a mobile service. Now, those are all great options. There's nothing wrong with any one of those, but when you introduce those other elements into the repair process, it has a propensity to add more onto the cycle time. No guarantee, right? No guarantee it's going to
Right.
extend it out. But if you're not doing everything in-house, there's probably a greater likelihood, or at least a likelihood, that you'll probably add some time, especially if you're going to take it off property. So I
Yep.
think, as an example, we have, and you mentioned earlier that I've been in the industry for a while now, and sadly, I'm no longer the young guy, I'm the old guy. Um, but I do have a little bit of history there, and from a solely from a history perspective, I would say that we have similar examples when technology was introduced or changes in car park that was introduced that had very similar impact. And I always give the example of unibodies. So when unibodies were introduced in the
Yeah.
80s, my dad had a shop at that time, and at that time we didn't have a frame machine. It used to be, you had regular rails on a car, and if the rail was bent, you could, tie a come along to it or to a tree. I'm making it up, to a tree, and you pull the rail and you're good to go. Well, when the unibody came around, that changed the game, right? Sophistication went up, tooling and equipment went up, the need for space in your shop went up, which is really no different than we see with calibration. So when unibody came out, they said you need a frame machine. You need space for a frame machine. You need a technician that could do the work, and you need somebody trained to do that work. How is that any different than what we have today when it comes to ADAS systems? You need space to do it. You need equipment to do it. You need technician to do it, and you need the training to do it. So it's kind of following that similar path. And what we saw over time was shops decided that, hey, I'm going to start making these investments instead of outsourcing it because I want to have better control over the cycle time or better repair control over the repair. I think you're going to see some more of that as time moves on, where more people are going to be bringing it in-house. Certainly not all, but more so than what we have today. So maybe we'll start to see some of that cycle time number start to shrink up by virtue of identifying calibrations earlier in the process, and perhaps maybe bringing more of those services in-house.
Yeah. There are any number of shops at this particular moment, even as we speak, that are investigating, what does it make sense? What can we absorb to do from a static calibration standpoint that maybe we send out at this particular point? And I think they're making good decisions. I mean, I think they're really truly understanding the environmental impact of like, what do I need to have in terms of space, size,
Yeah.
lighting, not doing calibrations out in a parking lot, not hanging a target board on a chain link fence, knowing
Yep.
that making any modifications to the measurements for a static target board are only going to potentially put the vehicle in a hazardous situation when the customer picks the car up. And I'm along with you. I think it makes sense for shops to investigate what makes sense for us to bring in-house to keep that cycle time piece really in check.
Hmm.
And then for whatever we can't do, if you are going to sublet because you've got a vehicle with a surround view camera that takes up a lot of space with the mats on the floor, or just from a bandwidth standpoint, you've got more cars to calibrate than you've got people to do them. Having a reputable sublet that can come in
Yep.
and do that work for you that again, checks a lot of good boxes, right? In terms of being properly protected, right? Because now they've got some liability as they touch the car. Do they have the right equipment? Do they have the right place to do the calibration? Uh,
Hmm.
again, thinking of all those things. So those are things that, as I talk to shops too, it's like, look, drive that ambition to go do everything you can in house to control that narrative. But in
Hmm.
the event that you need a qualified third party to help you out, make sure you're putting that vehicle in the right hands and not necessarily sending it off to a place where you have no idea what's going on with it, unfortunately. But I think what was the data was like like zero point 0.7 to 1.2 days additional cycle time per calibration. Was that some of the data that was on
Yeah,
that?
something like that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
directional. Yeah,
So it's as you look at it, you were mentioning the more calibrations on a vehicle, and people think like, well, there's a calibration, and it's actually maybe there's one or two or three sometimes.
yeah.
You're looking at potentially almost a day per calibration additional for cycle time, which causes a downward effect with like length of rental, customer experience. So there are all some negative pieces there potentially as far as like how shops should be really thinking about it. And again, as I like to say, if you don't think you've got ADAS in your shop now, most do. You certainly will at the very onset here, relatively soon. So, um,
I think you
the,
bring up a good point, Joe. I want to just double back on what you just
yeah,
said.
please do.
And that is, probably dissimilar to the unibody example. At some point in time, everybody had to have a frame machine if you wanted to be competitive, right? You had to find a space on your shop to do that. You'd probably be hard pressed to find a shop in the US that does not have a frame machine.
Right.
I think that's unlike calibrations for all the reasons you just mentioned. There's probably going to be some very good, reasonable examples as to why it makes sense to continue to sublet. And that could be sublet to a remote third party that, brick and mortar. It could be the dealer, and it could be somebody you call for a mobile service that you schedule to your facility. And there's all very good reasons for that. This is not going to probably follow that same path as a unibody where it's went from, whatever it was to like zero, almost 0% of the shops don't have a frame machine. I
Yeah,
think you're going to continue to see a good cross pollination of in-house and those that they're using remote service providers for, just because, like as you just said, we're going to have more calibrations on cars, and if you have a good sublet provider, that's going to be a real viable option for you to make sure that you're getting that throughput for the in repairing those cars on time.
absolutely. Do you anticipate sort of in the near future here too, shops moving towards I've heard the term specialization. You think that's gonna be something that's gonna happen?
So the answer is yes, and I think we're already starting to see that. Now, it hasn't certainly taken a stronghold on the industry just yet. And when you hear specialization, you might think of one thing. I think of OEM certification in a sense of
Yeah.
specialization, right?
Yeah.
So the car manufacturers all have certification programs, and their networks continue to grow. I think that that will continue to happen. That trend will continue to happen. We're going to see more shops participating in certified repair programs, lending itself back to what you just said on the specialization side of the house. Because when you're more focused in on a given repair, it's going to allow you to do a couple things. First off, it's going to let you just inherently have more efficiency because you're familiar with the brand.
Yep.
But back to the conversation we just had on calibrations, you know, if you're going to be doing nothing but Mercedes Benz, maybe you make that big investment now
Yeah.
in the tooling and the targets because you're doing a high percentage of those. If you're doing, all makes, all models, it may not make sense to invest in all the equipment that you need to properly calibrate a vehicle, where maybe you'll calibrate some in-house for this brand, and then maybe you outsource. Maybe you're only doing 5% of Mercedes Benz. Maybe those are the ones that I'm going to outsource because it doesn't make sense for me financially to make that investment in the equipment to do so.
Yeah. I think a lot of shops are investigating that as well at this particular point. Does it make
Hmm.
sense? We pull back the volume piece. We don't necessarily need to see 100 cars a month because it's scattered. As you mentioned, having access to or trying to pull all of the OEM information from every manufacturer can be a daunting task because
Yeah.
it's so widely diverse. Plus the fact that it changes. So if I narrow my scope to a few maybe domestic brands, and I'm also bringing in calibrations in-house. Now I can control a lot of that narrative. I really can dial in our
Hmm.
process and procedures and understanding and stay out in front of a lot of these things. And what used to be 100 cars per month is maybe 30, 40, or 50, and we really scale and modify. So I'm the similar opinion, Dan, as far as, that specialization sort of falls back into that OEM certification bucket, I think. And I'll be
Yeah.
curious to see if that starts to take off a little bit more. A lot of shops I talk to have considered something along those lines, and it may be maybe something to keep an eye on as we continue, into the next couple of years here, obviously. So, I want to kind of circle back a little bit on, I guess I'd call it like the genesis of the vehicle diagnostics network within CCC.
Hmm.
Um, I'm going to share a data point that you had shared when we were in your guys' office in Chicago back, I think it was almost a year ago. I think the term was the word calibration came up in your guys' database like 300,000 times.
Oh, that's true. That was one carrier, by the way. That
One
wasn't our
carrier.
database.
Okay,
That was one carrier, Joel. One carrier
that that
for one
is
year.
for 1 year, yes. Yeah, and, even more detail to the data point that's even more making my head sort of shake. So, it I guess maybe in that light, that's where sort of that diagnostics piece came from. I'd love to have you kinda talk a little bit about, like, what does that exactly look like, and how can shops integrate with that?
So as obviously as calibrations became more mainstream into the repair process, right? Shops needed a way to document properly what calibrations were being performed. Now, if you rewind a couple years ago, let's call it 4 or 5 years ago, if you looked within CCC One, there were very few entries that allowed a shop to choose from a database
Right.
to add in there calibrate blind spot, right? It wasn't there. So as more vehicles had calibrations and we got feedback from repairs, feedback from carriers. Hey, we need to find a way to get some standardization, harmonization around nomenclature just so we know what's actually being repaired on a car. We reached out to our integration partners and said, help us identify the 80% of the 100%, right? Let's get as many as we possibly can in the smallest bucket as possible. So from that, we were able to identify, it's expanded out now to 23. There's 23 database entries in CCC One today through Motor that allows a shop to more accurately document what's being done on the vehicle. And now it's not a manual entry. I'm not typing things in. It's coming across in a standardized way. Now, we made the joke, and it wasn't a joke, that one carrier had 300,000 unique entries
Yeah.
for how people were spelling calibration. Now, when I say 300,000 unique entries, that means it could be 300,000 times X. As an example, if somebody typed in their estimate CALIB period, and
That's
and
one.
that was used 100,000 times, that counts as one in our that 300,000 number we use. So it's really exponential. So 300,000 unique spellings that could have been used, millions of times throughout the process. So that standardization around the language is just helping eliminate some of the friction in the industry. So you're just documenting exactly what's done in that car, and it gives that visibility also to the consumer of what is actually being repaired. Because if you put CALIB, that does not tell the consumer what you repaired on the car. And I know there are some state laws out there. In fact, you referenced California. California is a really good example. They're pretty strict about how you document what you repair on a car. And if you do abbreviations that somebody doesn't really understand, that's probably not going to fly with the Bureau of Automotive Repair.
Right. Yeah. Good to know. I mean, great to have, obviously. So,
Yeah.
um, how can so shops that use CCC now, like, what does that look like to be able to use the vehicle diagnostics network?
Well, here's what's the cool thing. So let's focus solely on Rev today.
Okay.
With the integration, with the big announcement, how can I not? Right. So if you're listening today and you want to take advantage of the integration collision repair, it doesn't cost you anything. You just need to be a Rev customer. So if you're in CCC One, you're going to go to your settings, you go to diagnostic connections, click on the drop down menu, look for Rev, and you click connect. And now the integration is going to be completed. There's a couple other steps in there, but in the simplest form, Joel, there's a couple of mouse clicks there to help a shop get that connection done. So
Amazing.
now, as that shop is writing the estimate and they click save, it's going to generate the information to Rev, and Rev now can return back into CCC One the Rev report. If the shop is using Diagnostics Workflow, which is another CCC product. Sorry, this is not an infomercial. You asked the
No, no,
questions.
you're good. I wanted to ask because there's a lot of
Sorry,
people asking.
everybody. He's asking the questions.
No, you're fine.
If the shop happens to have Diagnostics Workflow, if you're writing the estimate, you click on that Diagnostics Workflow button. Rev is actually going to send back all the calibration recommendations while you're writing the estimate in the window. So I'm writing my estimate, I click on the button, and now in addition to getting that PDF, I get a pop-up window that says, here are all the calibration recommendations that Rev has based upon the year, the make, the model, the estimate lines, the point of impact, all the information that you ingest at Rev to generate what the recommendations are, specific and prescriptive to that particular repair. And it makes it easy now because going back to what you just add about documentation, when it pops up in that window now, Joel, I'm clicking on the ones I add, and they're all tied out to the motor database. So you're
Yeah,
not manually typing anything, right? So now
right.
you have that transparency and visibility we talked about earlier.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Appreciate the shared plug, as I like to say. I
Sorry.
mean, not what we use the platform typically, but I think it's just it's too important not to at least announce and add a little bit of color and flavor to it. But um, I'd like to ask everybody this question is, if you had 5 minutes to spend with every shop owner, independent or MSO,
Mhm.
what information what would you share with them, Dan? Like, what would that message be to them?
It's a pretty generic message because I think it applies to anything in life, and that is, especially in today's environment, you have to be a continuous learner.
Yeah,
And you think about with everything that's happened with this, the ADAS systems being so prevalent in the marketplace, you can't rely on what you knew yesterday or what you knew last year. You need to continue to invest in yourself and your team to stay on top of things so that you're making sure that these cars are being put back on the road properly. And that would be my message. Is just be a continuous learner. Don't assume that you repaired that car a week ago and that the repair procedures are the same or every make and model the same. It's not. You need to do your research and you need to be a continuous learner.
I love it. Yeah, I can't agree with that even anymore, actually. So I think that's wonderful advice. It's always interesting, like what the responses are when I ask this question. I think a lot of the responses in some way kind of come back to you've got to continuously educate yourself, stay out in front of the game,
Yeah.
connect with different associations. I know a lot of folks aren't, able to attend a lot of association meetings or trade show meetings. Part of like what we do is go out and we do some of these in-person events to help, spend a day with some of these shops where they don't have a chance to go out and do some of these things. But it's that knowledge base and that resource has got to be continued to be elevated. And I think it's got to be in a position where people can go grab it and gather that information. So,
Hmm.
um, this has been phenomenal. I really appreciate it. What will your message be if you want to share maybe a bit of a tease as far as for CIC for folks that are going to be there? Anything you want to share that may be part of your conversation or introductory speech on Tuesday morning?
You know what? I'm not gonna share any comments because people
Yeah,
need to show up. But
there you go.
because you know what, Joe? It's about that continuous learning, right? I
Yes.
mean, when you talk about continuous learning, it's not just about taking a class online or going to a class, right? It's really about investing in your business and in your industry, and that is coming to events like CIC. It
Yes.
is going to state associations. It is going to national association events because that is part of that journey of continuous learning. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, you know this, we're out there. When we go to those things, that's where we get a lot of our information, a lot of things that
Yeah.
helps drive us and the solutions we provide is because we're hearing it from directly from the consumer, our customer. What are the challenges they're having? What are the needs they have? So we're continuous learners as well by investing our time. Our companies invest in us going to these events so that we can be on that same track of pulling in the information so we can make ourselves better.
Love it. Yeah. So you heard it here. No tease on information at this particular point. Be there or not, but I'd love to see, obviously we'd love to see everybody there. Love to see everybody out in Vegas at SEMA. I think it's going to be a great event. As always, I'm really looking forward to it. I know they've got specifically in like the Upper South Hall, the ADOS showcase, which is going to be something relatively new that I guess they're launching this year. So we're really interested to see what that looks like, and we're going to get a chance to participate in that as well too. Look forward to seeing you out in Vegas, Dan. I really appreciate your time. And I'll find any final thoughts or parting comments here before I let you go.
Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your partnership and look forward to seeing you in Vegas.
Awesome, appreciate it. And safe travels, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
The cars entering your shop today are computers on wheels. Miss a mandatory calibration on these high-tech systems, and you're risking both your bottom line and your customer safety. At Revv, we know that putting safe cars on the road and getting reimbursed requires the right data and documentation.
Revv is an AI-driven platform that allows us to upload RO, repair order, and have it scrub through the services that we're performing.
Then, Revv automatically pulls information on your vehicle's required calibrations.
You simply click on the link. It takes you right to the manufacturer's pages, descriptions, what is required, how to do the adjustments. It is absolutely unbelievable.
Revv in general has not only given me the confidence to diagnose vehicles for ADAS calibrations, but it's also given me more knowledge.
It gives you the correct information on things you potentially never would have charged for.
And secure insurance reimbursements with confidence.
Makes task conveying this information to the insurers much easier, especially when our estimators understand the why behind the calibration.
and streamline complex billing configuration with Revv's invoicing feature and customizable rate builder.
They allow me to adjust and remove the operations that I may need.
No matter what stage of the calibration process, with Revv, empower your team every step of the way.
One of the unexpected benefits from Revv is actually their ability to help me plan and structure and schedule my day. Not only does it save me time, but it saves me a lot of headaches.
Ensure each vehicle leaves your shop safe, compliant, and ready for the road. Lead the future of ADAS calibration with Revv. Book your demo today.